Between now and 1 o'clock, going to have a panel discussion on the topic of the stages of the cross. Now, Good Friday, of course, central to the Christian tradition, but different people perhaps have different ways of commemorating that today. But firstly, wanting to welcome panellists in the studio. Firstly, from Rhythm of Grace, Mark Pierson. Mark, kia ora. Welcome to the program today. Firstly, just wanting to talk a little bit about the work that you do. I understand that you're involved with a bit of an art installation, which is an interpretation of the stages of the cross.
Rhythms of Grace has been around for about 10 years, and we've done a lot with the Stations of the Cross, and even more so back in the Cityside days where we did week-long art installation-based Stations of the Cross. Yeah, we have a whole set of arts-based stations, starting from Palm Sunday through to Easter Sunday.
No, very good indeed. Also joining us in the studio, Sister Sian Owen from the Pompelia Centre. Kia ora, thank you for your time today.
Kia ora.
Talk to us a little bit about your role and the work that you do, perhaps.
I have a very multifaceted role, but I have 7 mission hubs that work across the diocese in various areas. One of which is our Ministries to Young People, a very dynamic mission hub. And perhaps I can use this opportunity to invite any of our listeners in Auckland to join Stations of the Cross through the city. Prayerful recounting, remembering and walking of the Stations of the Cross from Albert Park at 9 a.m. on Good Friday, finishing at the Cathedral of St Patrick and St Joseph, and using our secular community to tell the story of the Passion of Christ in light of the fact we believe in the resurrection.
Yeah, very good indeed. I would encourage people to be involved with that. Joining us via Zoom, Brendan Malone. Brendan, kia ora, you're representing the laity today. No pressure in that regard. But this is
Andrew.
This is part of your faith tradition. This is something which you embrace, something you celebrate every year.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd also add to that, part of our family's tradition, in the sense that right through the Fridays of Lent, we've been trying to get along most Fridays to our local church to pray the Stations of the Cross, and then on Good Friday, a big one in particular.
And finally, but last but not least, Merv Duffy. Merv, wonderful to have you in the Rhema studio. Thank you for joining us. If you could explain who you are and the role that you have, perhaps.
Thank you, Andrew. Father Merv Duffy, lecturer in theology at Te Kupenga Catholic Theological College. So I teach a Christology course and try and encourage a love for the Lord.
Brendan, can you kick off the journey for us? And well, certainly according to some counting, the first stage is Jesus' sentence to death. This is the beginning of the chapters in the Gospels, but the beginning of the journey in many ways for Jesus.
Yeah, and I think one thing that really sticks out for me, and I think it's fair to say for most of my life, I actually failed to understand what I was hearing when I would read or hear that passage of the Gospel read out on Good Friday, where Pilate, who's desperate to get rid of this whole situation, brings out Barabbas and puts him alongside Jesus as Christ is convicted. And he says, well, to the crowd, make your choice, following a local Passover custom. And in the first recorded incidents of a referendum in the ancient world, where you discover the flaws of democracy and a bad choice is made. And I just thought this was another moment where the injustice was sort of heaped upon Christ, whereby the crowd chose the guilty criminal instead of the innocent Son of God. But in actual fact, it's a lot more than that. Barabbas was actually a political revolutionary leader. His name, Barabbas, is important. It means son of the Father. And he's not the real son of the Father. Christ is. And so what you've actually got going on here is a type of Antichrist who's being put alongside the true Christ, and the crowd's being asked to choose. And what's interesting is Barabbas is offering the crowd a type of salvation as well.
Yeah.
But his salvation that he offers is through power, through politics, and through revolution and violence and overthrow of the system, whereas Christ calls us to total self-giving love. And I think that same reality is playing out in our world today. And I was talking to a group of young adults earlier this week about this, and it's one of the things that really sticks out to me on Good Friday about this moment, is that the major secular political ideologies of our age are really fixated on power, whether it's Nietzschean will to power or Marxism, Whereas here we are being asked again every day, I think, to make that choice. Will we choose the way of Christ, the innocent Son of God who calls us to self-giving love, or will we choose revolution and power and other things? And so it's a very pivotal moment, I think, in the conviction of Christ.
Now, of course, this is a pathway that Jesus chose for himself. And just before the stages, and I know some churches include Gethsemane and even the Last Supper in their traditions, but this is a path that Jesus chose for himself. He said to his disciples that they would need to, at one point, take up their cross and follow him. The next stage in the journey, Jesus taking up his cross. Mark, your thoughts and reflections on this moment in the journey?
Yes, it's a part that's reenacted. Maybe the one part that is most often reenacted around Easter time on Good Friday, in particular, by churches who carry larger or smaller crosses around their communities, or from church to church. Or Melbourne has a Stations of the Cross that takes you right around the whole city, and there are brass plaques and sculptures at each of those. So I think this is the part that people most identify with, and which we talk about as the way of the part of the way of the cross, or the Via Dolorosa, or just following Jesus and taking up our crosses daily, which I think is probably a quite misinterpreted sort of piece of scripture. But the traditional stations have in them Jesus falling, and we'll probably come to that later, and a few other things going on that wouldn't necessarily be part of a biblical set of stations. But there's no question that Jesus carrying his cross, Jesus taking up his cross, was the expectation of those who are going to be crucified. Probably he was wearing a lot less clothing than he does in the images and the art that we see of him, certainly when he was on the cross. But yes.
The next particular station, though, from Jesus falling for the first time, Brendan, bringing you in, Jesus meeting his mother. This is a very heartbreaking, intimate moment, the connection of Jesus as a man, his earthly mother. Heartbreaking moment, really.
Well, and a profound moment actually in the history of salvation, because those who are familiar with the start of Luke's Gospel, there is the Canticle of Simeon, sometimes called the Nunc Dimittis, which means now dismiss in Latin, because Simeon prays out loud, at last, all-powerful Master, you give leave to your servant to go and go in peace, because my eyes have seen your salvation. And this is him meeting Christ in the temple when he's brought as a baby. And he says to Mary, his mother, at that moment, a sword of sorrow will pierce your soul. And this is exactly that fulfillment of that prophecy happening. Her heart is pierced with this great sword of sorrow as her son goes to the cross, and she's there with him on that journey.
Mark, wanting to bring you on this one, this next station, Simon helps to carry the cross, an outsider, somebody who wasn't acquainted with Jesus personally, but very much part of the story, part of the gospel narrative.
Yes, and not much at all said about Simon of Cyrene. It may even be the only mention that we have of him in the gospel. I'm not quite sure. But and it's strange to think that Jesus needed help, except it reminds us of his humanity, that God wasn't stepping in to rescue him here. Jesus was exhausted. He had been treated badly, violently, and he couldn't manage it.
Sian, your thoughts on something which is not in the gospel stories but has become a part of the Stations of the Cross narrative, the character of Veronica that wipes the face of Jesus. Talk to us about this one.
It's been in the tradition for hundreds of years, from about the 4th century, I think. I think it is reminding us that often help comes from unexpected places. It wasn't the disciples, it wasn't the named followers of Jesus, but it was a woman. And in that society that made her lesser than and at the bottom of the pile, that saw the pain and anguish, and at a time when people felt helpless to help, was able to help. And I think in this world that we're living in currently, that's a real sign of hope for us, that even if we feel helpless, we have the abilities to wipe the face and to console people who are in need.
And loving the fact that as we go through the various stations, including and welcoming people in the same way that Jesus included and welcomed people as a part of his earthly ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Merv, your thoughts on Jesus falling a second time? Now, as we've said beforehand, 3 times he fell. Each different time, each station brings a different spiritual significance?
The stations are meant to engage the people who are looking at them.
Yeah.
And as Sian said, we have Jesus falling 3 times. So this gets emphasis. And one of the things that all of us have is failure in our own life.
Yeah.
And the fact that they pray with Jesus falling and that they get up and carry on as he does. And the stations before also invite other people to help.
Yeah.
You know, to be Simon of Cyrene, to be Veronica.
The next station, and this is kind of the one between the second and third fallings, and Sian, wanting to perhaps bring you in on this one, not picking on you because of your gender here, but I mean, as we've said before, that there are women mentioned within the stations of the cross is so significant, and this is a moment where Christ stops to talk to the women of Jerusalem. Talk us through what's happening there.
I think that we all know what it is like to be helpless. And this station is reminding us that Jesus, even in his agony, even when he was undergoing immense strain physically, emotionally and mentally, was able to reach out and console. And even us, when we're feeling broken and damaged, we have the ability to console others. The other significance, I believe, of the station is that it is a station of the Scriptures.
Yeah.
Whereas other encounters with women are part of the tradition, right? Including Jesus meets his mother Mary. She doesn't appear until the cross in John's Gospel. So women were there. It's a reminder that those that maybe are not so obvious in this story, they were there.
And it is so important, as you say. This is in the gospel. This is the gospel is written by men, of course. The significance of including women as a part of this narrative is so important there.
And woman as witness.
Yes.
Not just doers, as witness.
Yeah. No. Very good indeed. Jesus falls for a third time. Anything that we can add to that? Is there a different emphasis? A different reason for including this in the list, do you think? General Merv or anyone else wanting to comment on that?
Just, he's given help and he now needs help.
Okay. The journey to the cross is complete. As you say, this journey, the Via Dolorosa, the path to Golgotha, it's at this point where Jesus arrives at his place of execution, and to add to his humiliation. Mark, you mentioned beforehand that Jesus was probably more naked on the cross than the depictions that we see in historical artworks and films. But this next station, Jesus stripped of his garments. Talk to us about what's happening there.
Yes, so I mean, he's not wearing a lot of clothes to start with, you know, not in the traditional Western modern sense, and clothing very valuable, expensive. So this is serious stuff, and those who are there abusing him, and some people in our contemporary world have described Jesus as being the victim of sexual abuse. Here and in some earlier parts of his trial, but particularly here where his clothes are taken off him and he's nailed to the cross, where this is a stripping of his garments, and where those who are responsible for the violence are gambling, betting among themselves, casting lots for who will get these valuable pieces of clothing.
This, for various of the stations, I suppose, and this is perhaps a great example of it, this has been prophesied, the way in which the Messiah would die, even this detail here, that people would gamble for his garments. This has been prophesied. This is a part of a much older Old Testament tradition as well. This is the fulfillment of that prophecy. So significant not just for this one, but for many different aspects of the crucifixion story, perhaps.
Yes, and it certainly adds to the depth of humiliation that Jesus is going through as a demonstration of his love, his great love for us.
Having arrived at the place of his execution, this is the point where Jesus is nailed to the cross, the next station on this journey. Brendan, this is that significant point. And again, for people who have seen depictions of this beforehand, who have Easter after Easter thought about what that would mean, what that would feel like, for Jesus to be nailed to a cross. This is a very brutal image. It sits heavily with us today.
Yeah, and I think actually something interesting I saw last night. I was out on my daily walk, and the local Anglican church has a sign out the front at the moment, and it says 1 cross plus 3 nails equals 4 given. And I thought it was quite a clever way of phrasing it. But you're right, it is a very brutal moment. I always think in this moment of the deliberate choice that Mel Gibson made when he actually filmed The Passion of the Christ.
Yep.
He doesn't appear in that movie at all apart from one scene, and it's his hand. He takes the place of the Roman soldier. You can only see his arm. He chose deliberately to be the arm nailing Christ to that cross. And he said, because I did that because I and my sins literally did that to Christ. And so I wanted to actually participate in that way. And I think it's quite a stirring reminder to us of our involvement in all of this and the profound sacrifice and self-giving love, the total abandonment of Christ who, as St. Paul tells us, loves us while we were still sinners. It's hard, it's dark, but it is profoundly beautiful and life-giving at the same time.
Yeah, certainly. And you mentioned Mel Gibson's The Passion, the stations that we're talking about today, those depicted on film, for some people of different traditions, when they're thinking about these stations that we're talking about today, very visceral images from that film, from the panelists generally. Your comments on that as a depiction of the Stations of the Cross, as a depiction of the story. Any thoughts and comments there?
It's interesting. Each age produces the artwork that maybe the age needs.
Yeah.
The Gospels themselves are actually light on the gruesome. The Gospels are a pretty spare narrative of the story. When we're looking at these stations, we're seeing a medieval take on it.
Yeah.
And I think Mel Gibson reflects the brutality of our age.
There's other artworks as well. As Brendan was mentioning, Mel Gibson made the decision as a director that it would be his hand that drove the nails. And I know that is a recurring motif in various arts. I'm thinking of the artwork Forgiven, with the character holding the hammer and nails collapsing into the arms of the risen Jesus. Mark, from an art reflection point of view, any thoughts on that and the way in which our culpability in the crucifixion of Christ is depicted artistically?
A massive variety of art of the cross. Some of it quite kitschy.
Yeah.
Some of it quite violently realistic. I think of sculpture, crucified Christ. As Merv said, every age, every era interprets the events in their own way and coming out of their own cultural milieu, I think.
Yeah.
Which is, it's only in the last decade or so that the idea that Jesus might have been a sexual abuse survivor, or have been sexually abused, is very new and not something that 50 years ago we would have even considered. So, a lot of depictions, and that's what makes the art interesting, I think, to look at the detail and see, so what has the artist conflated together? What parts of the story have come together, or what's the moment that's been recorded and how has it been recorded?
Yeah.
That's what makes the art interesting and useful, I think, for our reflections this time of year.
No, very useful indeed. And just finally, Sian, wanting to get your thoughts on I suppose as we're heading towards Easter, there'll be people celebrating Easter, of course, in many different parts of the world that are dealing with horrific situations. People in parts of the world where it's actually dangerous to call yourself a follower of Jesus. That Jesus was nailed to a cross, that he was the suffering servant, that for those who are going through difficult times, that they can look to Jesus and say, he understands. He also suffered. He also went through something horrific. That's an important part of this story, isn't it?
I think it is, but the fullness of the story is the resurrection. Because if we just sit and don't understand the way of the cross, the passion of Christ, in light of the fact that he rose again, it's a gruesome story.
Yes.
It's not a salvation story. Jesus died in agony that he might rise to give us new life. And that's why I think silence when we're praying the stations of the cross is really important, particularly after the 13th station where Jesus dies, that we come to grips with the fact that this is the first part. In many traditions, we talk about the Triduum, we talk about Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and then the celebration of liturgy of the year almost, the resurrection.
Yeah, certainly. And that is the hope that we have as a Christian community. Before the resurrection, though, the death of Jesus. And Mark, back to you again on this one. That moment where Jesus cries out, where he surrenders his spirit to the Father. Again, a very dramatic moment, and I suppose for those who were there, for the disciples who had followed him for many years, this was it. Their hopes were dashed. The lights had gone out. It is finished. Talk to us about this moment.
Yeah,
this
certainly.
station.
I think from the disciples in particular, but everyone connected with the disciples and even the general public. That, Palm Sunday, rah, 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 this is the one we're looking for. He's going to rescue us from the Romans. This is our king. Comes riding on a donkey. It's a bit weird.
Yeah.
But people are throwing down branches and throwing down their clothes, significant parts of their livelihood and their being, because of the hope that they saw in this Messiah, the one who would come to rescue them. And now he's dead.
Yeah.
And that hope is gone. It just has to be absolutely devastating. And it's so hard for us to put ourselves back there now because we know what's going to happen in the next few days.
We do, and we do have that hope. But also, I think for everybody, we do have those grief stories. We do have stories of people that we love who are no longer with us, who we prayed for, who we had hope for, and we had to say goodbye. Of course, the hope that we have means that the goodbye is not forever. But this station in particular, Merv, this is one which brings hope to those who are grieving as well.
Oh, very much so. This is where everybody kneels down for the station, because this is the climax of the story. Jesus dies on the cross.
Yeah.
Again, with your lists of 7, we have the 7 last words from the cross.
Yeah.
And your Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani is among them. And it's the only prayer of Jesus that doesn't start Father.
Yeah.
And he's quoting a psalm. But he, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yeah. And it's an extraordinary thing. And lots of people who have experienced being forsaken in their lives can identify with that and see that, in a way, Jesus was there before them and is somehow there with them.
And yet Jesus hadn't been forsaken.
Yeah.
No.
He didn't know that at the time.
No, powerful, powerful stuff indeed. As we are getting towards the end of this journey, the stations of the cross, after Jesus' death, his body is removed. This is the second to last station, according to many traditions. Of course, Brendan, this is a super sad moment. This is a quiet
absolutely
moment in some ways.
Well, and again, it's just the profoundness of, if you think about, there were plenty of pretenders who claimed to be the promised Messiah.
Yeah.
And the litmus test was, if your guy died, he wasn't the Messiah.
Yep.
And so the real profound impact of this can't be understated. And of course, this is a moment as well that's given rise to some profoundly beautiful works of art. Think about like the famous Pieta.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't had the privilege of seeing it up close and personal. I think Father Merv might have. My wife lived in Italy for a year, and so she's seen it. And it's a profound work of art of Mary cradling Jesus after the cross. But what I'm reminded of again in artworks like that when Christ comes down is here you think about the start of his ministry, and where does his earthly ministry start? It starts in the arms of his mother. It ends in the arms of his mother. And I think it's a reminder to us, we can perhaps tend to think of Jesus as a solitary character, the second person of the Trinity, going about his ministry. But if you look at the fullness of the Gospels, it's familial right from the whole way through. His family is present beginning and end and throughout. And then, of course, it's also communal, the community of the disciples. And I think it's a reminder that we're called into that. The family of God and the community as well. To me, it's a really powerful and stark thing that I'm reminded of in this particular station.
And as you say, many artworks inspired by that. Merv, you have
I
seen
have
the
seen
Pieta?
the Pieta,
And
it is amazing.
Yeah.
And Mary is gorgeous and too young.
Yeah.
And actually too big, so that the Christ child, the dead Christ, can fit across a lap.
Yeah.
And you sort of think she's all women, or she's. Michelangelo is quite a good artist.
Yes,
I recommend him.
But seeing it in person as opposed to pictures in a book, quite a significant difference, I imagine.
I was a little bit disappointed because I've seen so many pictures in books, and they've actually got armour glass in front of it to stop you attacking it.
Because it was attacked historically, wasn't it? Somebody attacked it with a hammer many years ago.
I saw it before it was attacked,
Okay.
and you could actually touch it.
Oh,
And
my goodness.
I was a young woman. It was before I had entered the convent, and I remember just crying.
Yeah.
And I thought of all those people that have held loved ones at death, physically, but also emotionally, and things like that.
And again, elevating the role of women in the story, even in a Renaissance medieval context.
Yeah, but elevating compassion. I think that's that. I think we need to recognise that all of us are capable and do compassion. One of the things we have in our tradition is we as sisters used to go on retreat from Holy Thursday until the Easter celebration, and one of the things we are often called to contemplate is, who do you hold?
Wow.
And who do you hold?
And who holds you?
Yeah, powerful indeed. Now, the final station, of course, Jesus laid in the tomb. As has been said already, this is not the end of the story, but this is where the Good Friday part of the story ends. This is in the Easter tradition. There's Good Friday, there's what happens then, and then there's this period in between. Is there a reason why the Stations of the Cross stops there, do you think? Do you think it's important to sit in that space of loss and grief and even embrace some of the hopelessness of that time before we rush to the resurrection and the celebration, perhaps?
I think that's very important, and something our contemporary culture is very bad at. I remember going to a Good Friday service one day in a large church, all the technology, I was really looking forward to it. See what they did with Good Friday. Our opening hymn, first few seconds was "Up from the grave he arose," and I just had to leave.
I'm the sort of guy that gets cross about eating hot cross buns before. Tradition can be very important. Let's do things in the right order, please.
And like a tangi, it isn't a short thing.
Yeah.
Because to grieve takes time. And Holy Saturday is part of the story of this weirdly dead day in the Triduum.
Just as we wrap things up, and again, thank you for all that you have brought. It is an emotionally fraught journey, and even for those who have been on this journey many, many years, important do this, to recognise this. Any thoughts on how we can invite others into this solemn, sacred space? How can we make part of our tradition? And Sian, you were talking about this earlier, how we can take this to the community, how this can be part of what we mean by Easter, not just the hot cross buns, not just the chocolate eggs. Any final thoughts around that?
Those of us who have pastoral leadership responsibilities have a much easier role doing that, because people come to services and they expect something. So yeah, it's difficult, more difficult, I think, for individuals, but churches, Protestant, Catholic, Anglican, a lot of services on over this weekend and the following week and the Easter weekend.
Perhaps an opportunity to invite somebody to Easter and say, hey, this is something to me. I think you would, inviting people along, and perhaps more of an openness to go to church Easter weekend than other weekends, perhaps.
And the celebration of the Stations of the Cross, wherever it's held, is one that's open to everyone.
Yeah.
It's not a problem to join in. And failing that, have a look at the art. As Mark was saying, there's magnificent art of this, and I think everybody's got access to images nowadays.
Yeah. On Good Friday we have 2 presentations at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. from an artist called The Art of the Cross. So, 45-minute presentations at Rhythms of Grace, Undercroft at the Cathedral on just exactly that.
I think you could make a whole meditation just looking at a cross.
Yeah. No, very good indeed. Just coming up on 1 o'clock, any final thoughts or reflections as we wrap up our time together today?
Andrew, can I say, that if I could sort of perhaps land again where we started, and I think, as I said, a lot of the dominant ideologies of the day are about power and revolution and other types of things and radical individualism, and the Good Friday story and the Stations of the Cross, I think, remind us of that call to self-giving love.
Yeah.
And also the power in that. Someone like Friedrich Nietzsche, who was obsessed with power, would look at Good Friday and say it was abject failure. But in actual fact, it was the most profound and powerful thing in the history of humanity. And then, of course, comes the even greater moment that we've heard about already today, of course, of the resurrection. And it's made all the more beautiful by taking this particular journey. It becomes more real in the joy of that moment. I think it was a previous Pope John Paul II, who said that we are Easter people and Alleluia is our song. And I think that only really comes to life when you first go by the way of the cross.
Very good indeed. I mean, for people of different faith traditions and denominations who are listening in, maybe they know the story, maybe they've seen some art or some film depictions of it, maybe they know the gospel story. What would you say to encourage them to literally take the next step, to go on a Stations of the Cross journey? Any thoughts on that?
I would really encourage anyone listening that would like to explore the Stations of the Cross. There would be very few communities in New Zealand that if you don't open the local paper or ring up the local church, there won't be some public walking of the cross around the streets. It's actually a very profound time in the church in New Zealand, I think, because we are able to witness the Christian churches walking the cross together.
Yeah.
I know in Beachhaven they do one here in Auckland. I know a number of parishes in Christchurch. It's a real sign, I think, that we together acknowledge Jesus as Lord.
Amen.
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 I think that's a round of amens. Thank you so much indeed for joining us today. It's always fun doing a bit of live radio. It comes with its challenges, but thank you so much for taking us on this journey through the Stations of the Cross, and certainly would encourage anybody who is listening or watching or a part of this conversation to take up that challenge and to find something which is happening in your local community, whether it's inside, whether it's a particular service or liturgy, or whether it's something which is happening outside. Do it with friends and family. Do it in reverence and silence, and prayerfully consider what this Good Friday means for you and take some time to contemplate that and to sit in the darkness of Good Friday as we look forward to celebrating Resurrection Sunday. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.